This podcast is sponsored by ebookit.com, self-publishing solutions for the independent author and small press. Visit us today at ebookit.com.
Welcome to the Toastmasters Podcast, the official podcast of Toastmasters International. Hello, everybody. This is Greg Gazin.
And I'm Ryan Levesque.
Ryan, I just listened to another new podcast. I can't believe how many new podcasts have come out this year. Have you noticed?
Well, glancing at my calendar, Greg, it's January 1st. So no, I can't say I've heard too many new podcasts this year.
Gee, thanks, Ryan. Happy New Year to you, too. What a way to start off that new year. Pick on your co-host.
Hey.
Hello, Toastmasters and listeners. That's what makes our podcast just so special. Speaking of numbers, when we looked back in April when Ryan and I did our 2 podcasts on creating interesting content, we noticed that Apple had 1 million podcasts in their directory. And since then, it's grown. In fact, I've heard numbers, I haven't seen them officially, but I've heard numbers as high as 1.6 million and still growing.
Wow.
In fact, many Toastmasters have started new podcasts.
As we've mentioned before, I think that introduction of the podcasting elective at level 4 of the Pathways program has probably been a catalyst for that. And of course, with all of the quarantine and staying at home, maybe people just have some extra time on their hands as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree. And probably around holiday time, maybe they got some new microphones and some new other gears. So there's another motivation and another incentive. But also, I know there's some out there that are just curious, but some are also hesitant. They're not sure about maybe putting themselves out there. I know a few people that have they're so close. They've recorded a few episodes, but they suffer from something that I know many years ago when I first started, I suffered from, was that perfection paralysis.
Insidious, isn't it?
Yeah. The funny thing is, Ryan, and you and I both know this, that what people hear is the final product, right? But they don't know the half of it.
Right? Yeah, that's true. It's not always pretty behind the scenes.
No, so we thought that to start off the new year, that maybe we'd help break the ice for the new year. Maybe even have you have some chuckles at our expense, as Ryan has already done this morning.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much, Ryan. So you'll get to hear about some of our flubs, some of the things that we had to do to fix up our podcasts, and we decided to call it Confessions of a Podcast Host to try to give you that little nudge to help you go forward.
Or even just to give you a look behind the scenes at what goes on and how we produce a show like this. Beyond that, as you probably are, Greg and I are both lifelong learners, and we figure, hey, if you can learn from our miscues, missteps, and mistakes and apply it to podcasting or anything else that you're doing in your life, Toastmaster related or not, then why not?
Yeah, we figured this kind of take on the topic would be more fun than simply lessons from a podcast host.
Or mistakes and mess ups and foibles of a podcast host. So, Greg, I've got 14 years of mistakes under my belt, and you've got me beat. You've got 15 years. So while we're going to be talking about examples from primarily the Toastmasters podcast, Greg, both you and I, our experience is colored and flavored by all of the different podcasts we've been a part of, and including now today, in addition to producing and co-hosting this show with you, I'm producing another podcast for a psychiatrist friend of mine.
Oh, yes. Welcome to humanity. I love Dr. Fred. He's always got something interesting to say.
Yeah, that's a fun show to do. And of course, even older than the Toastmasters podcast is your original podcast, Toastcaster.
Ryan, I get the feeling you're just going to keep rubbing it in all episode.
You've got more gray hair than me, buddy.
Oh, thanks. But that's true, Ryan. I started Toastcaster, the Communication, Leadership, and Learning Lab. And interestingly enough, fellow Toastmasters, that it started back in 2006 as a Toastmasters leadership project. Now, at that time, it was going to be a single episode, but 15 years later, still going.
That's amazing. And especially as you know, Greg, and as we've experienced together working on this show, life can get busy, things can come up, health challenges. I mean, all kinds of factors come in. It can make it difficult to keep on track and reliably pump out episodes on a consistent basis.
Yeah, that's true. Sometimes life does get in the way. And I know that I spent 8 years on the district executive. And during that time, it was really hard, right? Do we work on the district or do we put out podcast episodes? Sometimes it was a bit tough. And it's funny, Ryan, when you think about it. I mean, we managed to get the podcasts out, but when you've got three people, for example, on a podcast, there's you and I, that's two of us, then we have a guest. Now, if you're doing a solo show, it's one thing. You could do it at 2 o'clock in the morning in your pajamas or in your underwear, and no one's going to know. But with two co-hosts, you and I are roughly 2,500 miles apart, two time zones apart. And we've had guests on our show where there's a 15, 18-hour time difference. And
Mm.
just sometimes putting that all together can be really exhausting. But at the same time, at the end of the day, it is so worth it.
It is, and it's certainly a lot of fun. Okay, so let's roll into our first confession and know that these are in no particular order. They're not ranked or anything like that. My first confession is that booking interviews can be mentally taxing. Now, since this is a confession, I'm just going to put all my cards on the table and let all of our listeners know that my two weakest subjects going through school were both math and geography. And both of those come into play pretty strongly when booking interviews, particularly with guests and hosts in other time zones. It sounds like it should be pretty easy. For example, Greg and I are 2 hours apart, and that's just simple math, right? But I'm constantly find myself bested when it comes to time zone conversions and getting straight geography and who's where and all of that. And I know, Greg, you can relate. I remember, in fact, your very first episode, you had a double whammy on that note when you interviewed the chef from Trinidad.
Yes, Ryan. Speaking about going from the frying pan into the fire, it
Mhm.
was my first solo episode. It happened to be a situation where we needed to get an episode out. Both you and Bo were not available. So I interviewed Chef Shelly Ann Level. Now she's in Trinidad and I looked it up. Oh, yes, no problem. It's the Atlantic time zone. I'm in the mountain time zone, 3 hours apart, no problem. Well, to add insult to injury, unlike many parts of Canada and US, in Trinidad, they don't change their clocks. So, of
Mm.
course, when I phoned her, she was driving in her car. A little unimpressed. No, she was actually pretty good about it, but it was just a case of just getting the time zones just totally messed up. So, to alleviate those challenges, Ryan and I both use timeanddate.com, which allows us to punch in the location, the date, and it converts the time. So we know exactly who is where and what, and it takes into account any daylight saving time changes. So, yes, Ryan, I too have a little bit of a math and geography challenge.
But nothing a little technology can't help us with, right?
It's true.
And of course, once you have that date and time nailed down, the important thing is to communicate it to your guest. And the way Greg and I always like to do it is to communicate it in the guest's own time zone. So we don't have to expect them to do the mental gymnastics of converting since we've already done that research for them. So it just makes it a little more inviting, a little smoother experience for the guest.
And speaking of confirming, also make sure that you confirm with them what method that you're going to use to communicate with them. I
Mm,
mean, we use Zencaster. Some people are used to using Skype. Some people use Zoom. So I think it's pretty important that we do that because I still remember Ryan once sitting on Skype waiting and waiting and hearing nothing but crickets, only to discover that maybe we either weren't clear to the guest or maybe they didn't get the email because we had actually confirmed on the phone. They thought maybe they were going to be getting a phone call, in which case we didn't communicate that properly. I think we learned that a few times.
for sure. Rolling into our next confession, to start this off, I want to suggest that those of you listening who've given at least a speech or two or three or four or five or more, you can probably relate to the experience of the brain and mouth not connecting on the first try.
Or the second try.
That's true.
Good thing we don't do this podcast live, Ryan.
Yeah, that could be pretty embarrassing, considering some of the flubs that we've had over the years. And so that leads us to our second confession, which is that, yes, folks, we do airbrush our audio. You're probably familiar with the concept of airbrushing a photograph to give the appearance of perfection, to take away all of the flaws. And we do the same thing with our audio file before it reaches you, the listener.
So do tell Ryan, which is your favorite experience on this one?
Oh man, there's so many. But I did pull a recent one for us to play here. And I figure just like in a Toastmaster speech, whenever you explain a concept, but then can demonstrate with an example, it makes it all the more easier for your audience to appreciate that point. And so, with that educational benefit in mind, may I present to you an excerpt. This is from our interview number 169, Vision Beyond Eyesight with Deborah McAlexander, a time when my mouth and brain clearly did not connect. So we've poked around the edges of it, but could you just really quickly give maybe like a 30-minute sketch of what the sport of dressage entails?
30 seconds.
30 seconds.
Not 30 minutes.
30 minutes?
Ryan, that was so ironic because you said 30 minutes instead of 30 seconds. And this happened to be one of our classic situations where we have a guest that has so many stories, so much detail to offer. And there were so many incredible things that we could have included in the interview, but we just didn't have the time. And you just about gave her carte blanche just to go for it.
Yeah. In her mind, 30 minutes probably would have been a short explanation because she's got the whole world of what dressage is about.
No, absolutely. I mean, I had no idea what it was. So, of course, for those of you who listened to the episode, you know that that part was actually cut out. So we did do a little airbrushing there. And the flubs happen. They just happen sometimes. And so one of the things that we do is before we start recording, we make sure we let the guests know that it's okay to start and stop and pause in case they flub. But we typically will preamble it with, as Ryan and I do all the time. And that usually gets a good chuckle. Not only that, it helps if we have a guest who perhaps might be a little bit nervous being on for the first time, knowing that we flub, they feel much better about it.
Absolutely. And sometimes the flubs or unexpected twists and turns on an episode are just too rich to cut out. And Greg, as you will remember, being at the center of that incident, our interview with Judy Carter, which was episode number 162, Is It Okay to Laugh?
And boy, did we laugh, and the laugh was at my expense, but I also learned a huge lesson there is never try to put a laugh over Judy Carter. She is a comedian, a professional speaker. She is an absolute master. She will catch you in your tracks. Why don't you roll the clip, Ryan?
All right, here we go. Because as it turns out, Greg's audio has dropped out. So fear not, we will get back on track here, and this will be edited out, rather.
Well, so even this recording is a joke, right?
Exactly. I know.
All right.
Like,
And that's how life shows up. Nothing goes right.
Yep. It's the mess of our lives.
I don't think this should be edited out. I think your listeners
perhaps
should
not.
hear, because what's funny are the things that go wrong.
That's true. That's
Right?
true. Why would I want to squash the humor at such a
right
serious
now,
time?
everything's going wrong, right?
Right.
That's the
Okay.
nature of life.
All right. So I'm gonna stop the recording
Okay.
and then we'll invite Greg back in just a second, please. Judy, are you there?
I'm right here.
Thank you. Greg?
Yes, I'm here.
All right.
But it's still, wait a minute. I just unplugged my mic. How could it be coming through the mic?
Time to get rid of that Radio Shack special mic, I think.
Yeah. I sense you're about to defend yourself, Greg.
Well, I don't have a Radio Shack microphone. In fact, right now I'm using a Yeti Nano. I don't necessarily feel that I must defend myself, but just to put things into perspective, what had happened was we had some mic issues. You see, I'd recently got a new computer. My new computer had USB-C ports on it, different ports than I used before. So I plugged my microphone into a dock. So the microphone plugged into the dock plugged into the computer. Well, because Ryan and Judy were having such a great time chatting, my microphone went to sleep. It didn't turn back on. And of course, we didn't know until later that that was going to happen. So, of course, we had to restart everything, reboot. And then when we came back, Judy opened up with her famous line. And we just thought, this is just too priceless to take out. And now, in all fairness to Deborah McAlexander, if we would have had the time, I think we might have been able to leave that in. But we decided that we wanted to hear more stories from Deborah than put in a little joke at our expense.
Right. Definitely. Our next confession has to do with what we call the contagion of flubbing. Now, just like with the coronavirus, it's one thing to catch the virus. No one's going to blame you too hard for that. But if you're irresponsible and you're spreading that virus all around, spreading that contagion, that's when you become a lot more culpable. No amount of virtual social distancing can keep the contagion of flubbing at bay.
Oh, Ryan, I could hardly wait to hear which one you selected this time.
We're both going to take some heat on this one, Greg. So this is going back to episode number 168, our interview with Miss Hawaii USA 2020, Samantha Neeland. Now, I just want to say, Samantha was fabulous. She was a trooper. She was on point. But Greg, you and I were just attacking relentlessly with flub after flub after flub. And she came back strong, and we would flub, and she'd come back strong. And then finally, at one point, we got her to trip up. Not that we were trying. It's just that contagion of flubbing spread to her, and she succumbed. So let's take a listen to the progression of how this went down with a few key clips. I didn't mention this at the start, but Samantha, or let me say that a different way. The way, no, that's not good either. Okay. So Samantha, you are actually featured in, Greg, you're not one who is easily outdone. So you came back with a pretty rich clip as well here. So let's take a listen to that one.
Refer back, Samantha, to the article where it said that, and I'll just read the quote here. It said that, I'll just read the text. And it said that you moved around the world as a child amid different cultures. No, hang on a second here. Well, you wouldn't necessarily know what the final text is. Okay. In the article, it talks about you moving around as a child and you lived. No. It talked. I'm still thinking about.
We do great with that final question, Samantha. Don't you think?
Okay.
Wait. Start my time over.
Mulligan.
Yeah, mulligan. So you moved around.
So those are just a couple of examples of the false starts that we were throwing in Samantha Neeland's direction. And as I said, finally she succumbed, and she came out with the following.
That's not what I want to say.
You're catching it from us. It's contagious. Yeah. That's exactly what's happening, Samantha, just so you know.
Okay.
Greg, I think if I remember this episode out of all the episodes we've done over the years on Toastmasters podcast, I think this one took the cake in terms of really giving a guest a challenge to measure up to.
I probably have to agree. And folks out there, when you're doing these episodes or when you're doing your own recording, the stuff is going to happen. And in many cases, the challenges that we have could be just fatigue. I know that when Ryan and I interviewed Dhananjaya Hediarachi, the world champion of public speaking, 2014, that was my first episode on the Toastmasters podcast. With the time zone change, I was one that had to get up at 4:30 in the morning. Now, that's not an excuse.
It's a contributing factor.
It is a contributing factor, but just sometimes you get that one word, it just won't roll off your lips. And if that happens, that's okay. You can just edit it out. Some of our listeners are going to be thinking very poorly of us.
Perhaps.
But these are confessions. You know what? It's the new year. January 1. Yes, I know now. You reminded me.
And it's a fresh start. We're not going to let any of these happen ever again. Is that right, Greg?
Never
Maybe
again.
not.
Famous last words.
Right. Do you want to queue up our next one?
Well, Ryan, since we've now just put it all out there, we might as well move on to our next confession. And if you think about it, between the two of us, we have nearly 3 decades of combined podcast experience. Would that be fair?
Yeah, I think so. That sounds about right.
And we still have not found a way to keep Murphy at bay.
And if you're thinking Murphy, who is Murphy? We are, of course, referring to Murphy's Law, which says that anything that can go wrong will go wrong. And I can tell you that when it comes to podcasting, Murphy's Law often holds true. What are some of the things that we've had go wrong, Greg?
Well, we assume that the technology du jour will actually work. Some of the things that have gone wrong, I still remember. This was my first podcast back in 2006. I was interviewing a Toastmasters district governor, now called district director. We were using very ancient analog technology, didn't have the gain set properly. So when I got this recording, it was all highly distorted, and I spent hours and hours just trying to get it back to a point where it sounded just half decent. How about you?
Well, ironically, before starting to record this episode, we probably spent, I don't know, half an hour troubleshooting an issue with my microphone, which has worked pretty flawlessly up until today. So I don't know what's up with that, but I think it's, I don't know, I think it's Murphy trying to reassert his authority.
And sometimes, Ryan, we have sound issues so perplexing that sometimes it takes the guest to actually come up with the solution. Do you remember that one?
Yes, back to Deborah McAlexander again.
Oh, absolutely. We couldn't figure out why her microphone was so low. No matter what we did, we kept changing all the settings. Nothing was working. And then she said to us, I wonder if it has to do with the fact that my laptop cover is closed.
That might have something to do with it.
She was using the microphone that was built into her laptop, but unbeknownst to us, she was using a dual monitor setup. So she had the cover of the laptop closed. So, of course, the sound was muffled. So I think it took us about a half an hour to figure out that part.
But figure it out we did.
Yeah, we did. And we had a great interview.
Moving on to our next confession. And Greg, you wrote this one. It says, we don't give our guests all the questions in advance, even when they ask for them. How rude. Greg, explain yourself. Why would you not give your guests all the questions in advance?
No, Ryan, it's not that we're trying to be rude. After many years of experience, we've discovered that if we give our guests questions word for word in advance, typically that they will over prepare. And I think that we also covered this in our episode 157 and 158 about creating interesting content. We've had experience in situations where one individual will have the answers so well prepared that they'll come across as being read. That's the first thing.
Yeah.
The second thing is we also had another experience where one individual was so well prepared and so well versed that after they insisted on us giving them the questions in advance, in fact, multiple questions, he proceeded to answer everything in pretty much the first breath. Right.
Right.
And the other reason is, and there's lots of reasons, is that sometimes in a conversation, when you ask someone a question, they will answer the question, which brings up another question, or maybe something that needs to be maybe elaborated on a little bit more, or another question needs to be asked. Maybe the conversation shifts, because sometimes when you're having an interview, you're not sure exactly where it's going to go, and you're just looking for a good interview. And so if you give them the questions in advance, it's just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then you're done.
And to be fair, we certainly do give the guests an indication of where we want to go in the interview. And if they do ask for questions in advance, we do give them sample questions of the kinds of things that we want to ask about, but we won't necessarily include all of the context or the exact way that we're going to say it, so that it's not just, as you were saying, Greg, so that it doesn't become so tightly scripted. So there's still some spontaneity and room for exploration in the discussion.
Yeah. I mean, we're not there to throw a curveball at them. We don't want to embarrass them or throw them out in left field or make them go far out of their comfort zone. In fact, that there is something uncomfortable that perhaps they may have mentioned in an interview or was written up in the magazine, we will ask them ahead of time. We would like to ask you about this. Is that okay?
Yeah. Are you comfortable with that?
So it's not such a bad thing then.
Not at all.
But there are also other things that some people might consider being rude,
Such as?
such as our next confession, that we are often discreetly multitasking during interviews.
And to be clear, we're not talking about watching cat videos on YouTube in the middle of our interviews. But what we do is keep a Google Doc open to message each other regarding where to go next in the interview. If a question gets answered by a guest earlier than we expect, we might need to pivot. And so Greg and I are quietly sometimes tapping on the keys back and forth to each other.
And again, we're not being rude. We do let the guests know typically that we are doing it. We do it to try to keep the conversation flowing as opposed to stopping between questions if we can avoid stopping. We don't really want to stop more than we have to. If we were in the same room, we could perhaps send notes back and forth or maybe signal each other. But since we're 2 time zones away, it's just not really possible.
Yeah.
The Google Doc actually works really well because with a Google Doc, you can see the information flowing in real time. So not only are we perhaps making modifications to the questions, but in the chat box, we're also saying, okay, let's go here, let's go there, let's wrap up, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, it's a great tool for collaborating.
It works really well. Yeah.
All right, Greg. So we've put ourselves out there today. We've laid our cards on the table, had a few laughs. But what does it all mean? What's the takeaway? What is the lesson or the learning for our listening audience?
Poke fun at Greg.
That's right. You can never go wrong with that. That's always the answer.
But in all seriousness, just like a Toastmaster speech, your podcast, it doesn't have to be flawless to deliver value. Just as we're often told when we approach our Toastmaster speech, we're looking for excellence and not perfection. At the end of the day, if you are producing a podcast, you want to look at a win-win-win situation. You want to look at it as a win for your guests, a win for your audience, and of course, you want to get a little out of it for yourself to sort of keep the juices flowing and keep the battery charged.
Of course. And in addition to what you get out of it in terms of just the pleasure or expression that comes from having a podcast, bringing a growth and development mindset to it, I think, can be so valuable because that way your mistakes can then lead to discoveries. They can be stepping stones for enhanced performance in the future. So again, whether it's a Toastmaster speech, a podcast episode, we don't ever want to be intentionally sloppy or careless. We have shared with you some mistakes that we've made. They've never been intentional. And we do put forth a reasonable effort to cover the bases, ensure a good experience for our guest, and of course, to ensure a quality product for you, our listeners. And our goal is just to continue improving over time.
So we hope that you found this episode enlightening, maybe got a few laughs, but perhaps there's some really good takeaways that you could use for your future podcast or just in your future speeches. And just a reminder that there is a podcasting project in level 4 of Pathways. And even if you're not at level 4 yet, you might want to have a peek at it. There will also be an article in the January 2021 issue of the Toastmaster Magazine, specifically dedicated to podcasting. And please make sure that you follow us on Twitter at the TM Podcast. You can also find the Toastmasters Podcast at toastmasterspodcast.com, toastmasters.org, also on Apple Podcast, Google Podcast, and many of your favorite podcast platforms.
So thanks for listening, everyone. Happy New Year. Happy 2021. We will see you next time.
See ya.
Isn't it about time you published that book you've been thinking about? We can help with that. At ebookit.com, we've been providing authors and small presses with ebook publishing services since 2010. Visit us today at ebookit.com and let us know how we can help you.